If you've seen my review for Jena 20, you know that recently I tried the Napoleonic 20 system by Victory Point Games, and I really liked it. I loved the idea of having the fate of Europe in my hands and being able to determine that fate with just 20 counters on the board. So cool. And then the game was so smooth and it played so fast, just a lot of fun. So I decided to explore the series more, and I'm pretty serious about this. I decided to try not just one more game, but 4. And so I picked up Dresden 20, Waterloo 20, Austerlitz 20, and Bussaco 20. And as you can imagine, I'm going to report about each of these games in my reviews. So you're gonna have a mini series, a Marco 20 series of reviews. In the reviews about these games, I'm not going to go over the series rules again. You can find them in my review for Jena 20 if you don't know them yet, if you're not familiar with the system. Also, you may have a strange sense of deja vu right now. Well, that is because I'm using this same segment here to open all of my 4 reviews of these Napoleonic 20 games. I don't think I need to film myself 4 times repeating more or less these same things, and less time for filming, more time for playing. Today I am reviewing Bussaco 20, a game that covers a battle that was fought in Portugal in 1810 during a campaign waged by the French army in the attempt to pursue the British forces out of Spain. It is a battle that is interesting in that the two armies had different advantages. The French army had much higher numbers, whereas the Allied army had much better position. Well, let's see what happens when that situation receives the Napoleonic 20 treatment. This is the map for the game. It is a standard Victory Point Games map in terms of production. It looks a little bare, a little empty at first, but then if you look closely, you see that there are interesting terrain axes such as towns and woods and rough terrain, especially in this area here, which will be important because they modify combat and therefore they will enter the strategy of the players. But clearly the single most important feature on the map is this line here, which cuts the map in two, and which is a steep slope, which is a new type of terrain that was added to the series in this game. The slope does not have any special features in terms of movement. You still have to spend +1 to cross it uphill, just like in other games in the series with other slopes, but it is different in terms of combat because it gives a +2 modifiers to units that are defending uphill. This is the top of the hill, and this is the bottom. And once you see the setup, you will see how important that is. Also, this map has only 2 objective axes. One is here, and this is the one for the Allied player, and then you have this objective axe here, which is the one for the French player. So these are the 2 axes that the players need to defend, because if the opponent has a unit there during a night turn, then the owning player will lose morale. This is the initial setup, and as soon as you see it, you immediately understand what the conundrum here is, because the Allied player is defending on top of the slope, and it will be the French player that will have to find a way to inflict damage on those units, and that's going to be pretty problematic, because if the French player just advances here, these units that can combine the combat factor because they are adjacent with also the bonus of the slope are pretty much invincible. The French player can be certain that he'll be trounced around here. So how do you do it? That's really the riddle. The French player on top of that is also slightly outnumbered at the beginning of the game. However, he has some units scheduled to enter the game during turn 1 and 2. Also, there's a conditional reinforcement, which is this sweet artillery here that will enter the game at some point, most likely through a card. But the problem is that the French player really has the pressure to act. He needs to do something. In fact, the Allied player starts the game with 1 point of morale more than the French player does. So if nothing happens, if the British player just sits there and the French player does not do anything, then the Allied player will automatically win the game, precisely because he will have more morale in the end. So the French player really has to figure out how can this be done. There are several ways in which the French player may try to attack the Allied army. One way may be to send some units in this direction, trying to move around the Allied army, maybe taking advantage of this clear exit here, just trying to climb the slope here, and probably the French player will leave somebody in here to protect the objective X, and probably the Allied player will react to that by sending some units in this direction and by keeping or moving some units toward the center to protect the objective X. The French player may also try to do the same, moving in the other direction, but it's a little more complicated because if he tries to go up the slope here, these units are particularly strong, so the risk of being crashed is considerable. And walking around the slope this way is also complicated because there is a bottleneck here between the slope and the river. If the Allied player places a unit there and projects a zone of control all around, then it becomes pretty complicated. Or the French player can try to do something different, which is to split the army and to send units in both directions, as if trying to climb up the slope from both sides. And this has several effects. Of course, the center will be particularly weak, but actually this may be a trap. Maybe this is the point. The French player maybe is not actually trying to climb the slope from both sides, but is just forcing the Allied player to stretch his defenses so the defenses are weaker. Maybe he's trying to lure some units of the Allied army into moving down the slope in the hope of occupying this objective X easily. And at the point once they are down the slope, they become much less dangerous for the French player, especially in later turns when the French player has more units on the map. And it is a pleasant surprise to see that in a map that looks so restrictive with this big, strong divide in the middle, there are still many things that can happen, many possible outcomes. Sometimes the breakthrough will be in one point only, sometimes it will be in several points, sometimes the French player will manage to bring the battle entirely here, where it's clear terrain, and later in the game he will have superiority, so he will be able to do a lot of damage when he can finally fight freely. It may be that part of the battle will be here, part of the battle will be here, or in different areas across the slope, with units occasionally circling around and trying to conquer the objective, detaching themselves from the main battles just to take control of the objectives. There are really a lot of things that can happen. Surprising, and as I said, pleasant surprise that gives this game more replayability than you would imagine at first. Like in other games in the series, here you have a deck of cards that will generate random events each turn. Some of these cards will determine the same event for the Allied or for the French player, depending on the player that is drawing that card. Some other events are specific to the French player and to the Allied player. Now, this deck to me favors undoubtedly the Allied player. In fact, the events that are specific of the Allied player are all either neutral or positive. They give the player advantages. The ones that are for the French player, some are good, some are neutral, but there are also some bad ones. These three cards, in fact, will give penalties in terms of movement to the French player. To me, this deck works well in the game because it strengthens the sense at the beginning of the battle that the Allied player is invincible, better position, a lot of units, and keeps getting good events, positive modifiers from the cards. Later in the game, when the French player finally manages to get in contact with the Allied units, and probably there's going to be some fight in open terrain, in clear terrain, well, at that point, the French player has the upper hand because the French units are objectively stronger than the Allied units. Then having better cards for the Allied player keeps the balance. It creates a certain balance that makes the game interesting. In a nutshell, this is another great game in a great series. I really enjoyed this game. A game that is so simple and yet it does create a strong narrative. You really had the sense that during the first day of battle, the French army is strong but yet somehow cannot figure out a way of acting effectively. The terrain is stopping them and they have mismanagement on part of their commander, which here is represented by the cards, that that give penalties to the French army, especially when it comes to movement. And then later, finally, the French find the strategy, they start fighting better, but it may just be too late at that point. At that point, it may not matter anymore. It's a very interesting situation. So the game only has one scenario, that is true, but I think there is a lot that can happen in that scenario. I find that it still has a good replayability. Maybe you won't play it every day, but if you play it once in a while, I think it's a game that every time will present tough decisions, tough choices. You will see a new thing that you can try. It will not work, so we will have more challenges for the future. Overall, I enjoy the Napoleonic 20 series more and more as I continue exploring it. I'm more and more amazed by the flexibility of the system, a system that is so simple and yet fits so well so many different types of battle. Now that I know the system, I really enjoy the feeling that when I get a new game, I can get it out of the Ziploc bag and in 10 minutes I am playing it. I can jump into the battlefield immediately without having to go through the process of self-education, of learning a lot of new rules. I don't have to take 4 hours to set up a game. It is just a great feeling that there's literally a battle waiting for me in every new Ziploc bag, just waiting to come out, and I'm in. So overall, great series, and Bussaco 20, a very good game. Different from the other installments in the series, it feels different, but well, give it a try. I think you may like it.